This is the U.S. Report with James Morrow.
Good evening and welcome to the program. Coming up tonight, Donald Trump takes New York by storm. New revelations on the FBI's shoot-to-kill orders in the Mar-a-Lago raid. But first, what's the old line about saying the quiet part loud? Well, looks like our old friend Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez fell victim to this classic rhetorical trap this week, admitting something most of us have thought all along, but never had laid out for us in quite such stark terms. Namely, that the Stormy Daniels hush money trial and all the other legal actions against Trump are part of a conspiracy to keep the former president off the campaign trail. Here's AOC speaking to reporters about Trump's big rally in the Bronx, New York, traditionally Democrat territory.
And by the way, he's doing it in the South Bronx not to make a point, but because he's got court. And the man practically has the legal version of an ankle bracelet around him, and he can't leave the 5 boroughs because he always has to be in court. And so it is truly an embarrassment to him. And I am looking forward to the response of everyday Bronxites talking about how they feel about him coming to their backyard.
Ah, yes, you get it now. The trial, you see, is like an electronic monitoring bracelet, the sort of thing the government uses to restrict people's movements. AOC, girl, come on, you're not supposed to let that slip when the Fox cameras are around. But as it turns out, those Bronx residents who, again, history shows are pretty solid Democrat voters, are also not so keen on Biden. Have a look at what this guy had to say about the idea of Joe Biden making a trip to the Bronx like Donald Trump is doing right now.
Should Joe Biden come?
Sleepy Joe, Sleepy Joe. Sleepy Joe got to wake up if you want to come.
Sleepy Joe, this Trump voter here, too, was scathing about the way Joe Biden's policies have damaged the African-American community.
Joe Biden's policies has failed. It's failed us when in terms of the economy, in terms of his illegal immigration, in terms of the environment. I mean, these policies only hurt black people. It doesn't help them.
And check out this enthusiastic crowd in the Bronx, which again is the Democrats' home ground. And here's a little bit of what the former president had to say in the Bronx.
But above all, New Yorkers have something called common sense, and we do have common sense. An old-fashioned American common sense is exactly what I intend to bring back to the White House, just like we had for 4 years. You know, we had 4 of the greatest years in the history of our country. We rebuilt the military, we cut taxes, the biggest tax cut in history, the biggest regulation cut in history. We defeated ISIS. We defeated ISIS, and we did it in about 1/100th the time. They said it would take 4 to 5 years. It took me like 2 months, right?
Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, James, come on. You've just found some grabs here to support Trump, but surely Joe Biden can't be doing as bad as all that, can he? No way could Donald Trump be so popular. Well, okay, fine. But now let's go to some other data points here. Check out this report in thehill.com entitled, "Alarmed Democrats Flee Biden's Ailing Brand in Battleground States." This report talks about just what a rough time the Democrats are having sealing the deal where it's needed most. And the thing that comes up in this report time and again is the fact that Biden is generally seen as old, weak, and worse. The report quotes one anonymous Democrat senator on the problem saying, quote, "If you go out there and do a focus group, the focus groups all say, Biden's 200 years old. You got to be kidding me." And the worst part about it is for unaffiliated voters or people that haven't made up their mind, they look at this and say, you've got to be kidding us. These are our choices, and they indict us, the Democrats, for not taking it seriously. And this is the heart of the problem, which sees Trump not just overall up in the polls, but also in the swing states. Australians think of these as key marginal seats where it really matters. Here's the latest Cook Political Report poll, which shows swing states across the board for Trump. Arizona, Trump up 4. Georgia, he's up 4. Michigan up 3. Nevada up 8. North Carolina up 8. Pennsylvania, he's up 3. Only in Wisconsin are the numbers even. And in another worrisome development for the Biden camp, third-party candidates are also pulling support from the Democrats at a slightly higher margin than from Republicans, which may be part of the reason why the White House has been so keen to try and cancel the RFK Jr. campaign. And as a result, they're having to swallow a big dose of cope, even at MSNBC, where the news is predictably grim.
Look, we've seen in the past, Mika, that candidates who are seen as maybe not as strong on the economy ultimately win an election, like, say, Barack Obama in 2012. But to be losing by this margin, that is unsustainable at this point for an incumbent.
Look, anything can still happen. 6 months is an eternity in politics. China could invade Taiwan. We could get another coincidental election year pandemic. I'm looking at you, bird flu. All sorts of things could happen to change the game. But at this point, I think the most likely thing to happen, or at least the smartest thing for the Democrats to do, is to change the candidate. All right, let's bring in our first guest tonight, Adam Creighton, Washington correspondent for the Australian newspaper. Adam, thanks so much for coming on the program. Now, earlier today, Trump held his first rally in New York in 8 years. He was up in the Bronx, a neighborhood that is 64% Hispanic, 31% black, and he had a very large crowd out there showing us how much of the non-white working class vote he has a chance at getting. Adam, how'd he go?
Well, look, I think it went very well. I mean, there were clearly thousands of people there, which is certainly a lot more than the dozens or at most 100 people that Joe Biden gets at his events. Let's be fair. So, look, I think it's a really good snapshot of where the campaign is right now. I mean, I think the Trump team is very, very confident. You know, so confident that they're willing to go into South Bronx, which, as you say, has been a Democrat stronghold for a very long time. Indeed, I think the last time a Republican presidential candidate went there was 1980 with Ronald Reagan. So Trump is very confident, and look, the 2020 results, Democrats won South Bronx by 84%. That was the vote, 84% for the Democrats. So it's a big call, but there was certainly a lot of enthusiasm there. And look, if you just think of the reverse, imagine Joe Biden now going to Alabama or Missouri. I mean, that's just unthinkable, and I think that just shows you the respective levels of confidence in the two campaigns.
Well, I mean, Adam, you and I have both covered a lot of campaigns over the years, watched these things, studied these things. And I'm thinking about how in 2016, you know, Donald Trump won simply because he got out in front of so many more people than Hillary Clinton. And now with the Biden campaign, their strategy is let's just keep him as limited and under wraps as possible because he's going to make a mistake somewhere and it's going to be really embarrassing. Is this just the simple ability that he has to go and speak to people and get out in front of people and energize his voters? Is this a key advantage he has going into November?
Well, certainly, I think the court cases have helped Trump. I mean, you just have to look at the betting markets and the polls over the last 6 months or so. I mean, every new indictment, every new hearing, I mean, his support goes up. So if it was a strategy to keep him under wraps and to prevent him campaigning, it's clearly not worked yet. But the court case itself is going to wrap up probably next week. And assuming that there's no appeal, if he gets off or it's a hung jury, then he's free to campaign. So it won't have worked at all. I mean, I think, you know, if you look at one interesting stat that I noticed just recently is the average of the 8 political betting markets, which is tracked by Real Clear Politics. Trump's chance of winning in November has just gone above 50% for the first time. So that's quite an interesting change, right? So I think the odds are really firmly right now are on a Trump victory. And just back to South Bronx briefly, I mean, the support amongst black and Hispanic voters from 2020 to now for Trump has just increased dramatically. I mean, I think something like 12% of blacks in America voted for Republicans in 2020 and now support for most polls are saying it's about 25% now, which is a massive increase. And if that is sustained in November, then it's almost certain Trump will win.
Yeah, and that even brings up the idea, the possibility even, that he could take New York State, which I don't think the Republicans have taken since Reagan's massive victory in 1984 against, here's a name from the past, Walter Mondale. But anyway, let's move on here, too, because also there's going to be the question of who is he going to pick for his VP. And there was an interesting thing that happened this week here where Nikki Haley piped up and suddenly said she's going to vote for Donald Trump, which seems very odd coming from someone who said this about him just 3 months ago.
We can't have someone who sits there and mocks our men and women who are trying to protect America. It's a pattern. It's a pattern of chaos. It's a pattern of irresponsibility.
Adam, is this a case of relevance deprivation syndrome in action, or is she trying to make a plea for, consider me for the vice presidency? And if she's not the VP, who is Donald Trump thinking about as his running mate?
Well, look, I think she probably thought a lot about saying that at the end on Wednesday, that she's going to vote for Donald Trump. I think she's just been reading the polls like you and I have. She's been looking at the betting markets and she's seen the writing on the wall. And you'd have to say at the moment Trump's going to win. Now, if Trump is going to win, she doesn't want to be a mortal enemy of Donald Trump. And that's not necessarily meaning that she'd be the VP or even in his cabinet again. But she wants to be on good terms with him. That makes perfect rational sense. So I think her statement this week is yet another sign alongside the South Bronx rally of just how confident the Trump team is kind of right now. Look, I don't think she's got any chance of being his VP running mate. I think there's too much bad blood there between the two of them.
Yeah.
I mean, you played some of the quotes. She said he's an agent of chaos, etc. Look, we just don't know who he's going to pick, and he's not going to pick anyone until much closer to July when the convention is. I mean, he's basically said that. So he's quite enjoying now having all of these candidates, following them around the country, going to court, offering support. Because obviously many of them do want to be in that position. And it's a much more important vice presidential position than normal because, Trump can't get a third term. So whoever is that VP is going to be in a very good chance to be the candidate for the following election.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of the election, though, this was really interesting. Out of Ohio, there's been this fascinating, complex, legal, arcane, slightly thing happening here where on Election Day, Joe Biden might not be able to appear on the Ohio ballot after the state legislature warned the party that he's going to miss the state's deadline for filing as a candidate. What is happening here, and is there actually a chance that this state, Ohio, could actually not see Joe Biden on the ballot? It's a huge state electorally.
Yeah, well, look, each state kind of runs their own electoral rules, and many of the rules are very obscure, and there's so many states, and they're so complex that I think sometimes even the federal campaigns forget what the rules are. And I think it's just recently emerged, as you point out, that for the state of Ohio, you have to be the declared candidate 90 days before the election. And because the Democrat convention is not until August, Biden will not satisfy that 90 days. So it may well be that he can't appear on the ballot. But I think some politicians in Ohio, some of the legislature, they've said that they're going to try to change the law. So, look, I mean, they probably will change the law, I imagine. I think it'd be very unfair if he can't appear on the ballot. But I mean, even if he didn't appear on the ballot, it's very unlikely that Biden would have won Ohio anyway. I think it's been Republican now for many, many cycles.
Indeed. Now, finally, I want to talk about this huge crisis at the southern border, which just keeps on playing out. Let me play a little clip here from a Fox News reporter who was near San Diego this week. That's down in very southern California. Have a listen to what he witnessed.
For the first time since the 1990s, Border Patrol San Diego sector is now seeing the most illegal crossings of anywhere on the southern border. And we were out here during the overnight hours as masses of men from around the world came through here. We watched men from the Middle East and Asia pouring in here very nonchalantly as they crossed illegally. Several of them are what are known as special interest aliens. That means they are coming in from countries with potential national security concerns.
Now, that's disturbing enough, but listen to Karine Jean-Pierre from the White House talk about this.
The president has the authority to do something about this.
Why should he have to do it unilaterally? Why should we do it in a legislative way? You're right, he took many executive actions before.
Adam, tell me, why should the president have to do anything about this?
Well, I mean, he's the president, he's the executive, he should, and there's certainly enormous political demand to do something. I mean, it's the #1 political issue in the US now, according to most polls. It's not inflation anymore. It's the southern border, effectively, and people understandably concerned that something like 9 million people have crossed the border in just a few years, which is extraordinary. That's the population of a small country. And of course, many of these people are bad eggs. And what's interesting about the California situation is that the arrivals have moved over to California from Texas. Numbers have dropped off in Texas. There's been a tough response there, but it's more or less a case of whack-a-mole, where you try to, you stop them coming in one state and then they go to another state. So it really needs a strong federal response. But there's all these there are all these theories about why Democrats don't want to stop the flow, to get votes in the future, etc. So I don't think there's going to be a tough response coming.
It's a real shame, but anyway, what can you do? Adam Creighton, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, James.
And now let's bring in our resident legal expert on all things Trump and the cases against him, trial lawyer Robert Barnes. Robert, thank you so much for coming on the program tonight. I want to ask you, first of all, before we get to Stormy Daniels, about these recent court filings from the Department of Justice that were released authorizing, when we go back to that Mar-a-Lago raid, the use of deadly force when the FBI agents swarmed the residence in August 2022 looking for classified documents. They were told to come armed with ammo, handcuffs, bolt cutters, all sorts of things, and even that they were prepared to engage with the Secret Service. It really looks like they were spoiling for a firefight here with the security agents at Mar-a-Lago and maybe even Trump himself. Robert, what's your reaction to these disclosures?
I think it shows the degree of the insanity of all of this, that they should have never done a search warrant on the president of the United States to begin with, the leading opponent of the incumbent administration, the former president, neither of which has ever happened before in American legal history. This was something they could have obtained these documents and information without even doing a search warrant in the first place. But if they were going to do a search warrant, it needed to be coordinated with the Secret Service so there would be no risk of it escalating. And it's only thanks to Trump's people preventing escalation that we didn't have a Ruby Ridge or a Waco or that level of disaster at Mar-a-Lago involving the former president and leading opponent of the Biden administration. So it shows how out of control the Biden administration is right now, that it almost was seeking out undue and unnecessary escalation that could have been a public travesty and tragedy for the world.
Well, I mean, that's what I want to ask you, Robert. I was reading all of these filings. I was absolutely shocked by how confrontational they were. And they were pretty much written like they were going to go raid a crack house down the road rather than, as you say, the residence of the former president. Is it far-fetched? Am I being conspiratorial here to think that there may have been elements involved with this planning who would have been hoping for less cooperation from the president's team?
I think that's absolutely the case. And the FBI's had a history of this being a problem. That's really how Waco got out of hand. There were people who were drafting that search warrant and that execution of it who wanted Waco, the people inside those buildings, to respond a certain way so they could escalate. And we know how that turned out. Similar to what happened at Ruby Ridge, that when you get these elements that want somebody to fight back, that want somebody to contest, that are doing things to escalate and raise the temperature rather than reduce it, you're inviting a public tragedy. And I think there were some people who really were wanting and hoping and seeking this to be escalated so in their minds they could further marginalize President Trump. Oh, look at what happened when the FBI tried to get the documents back. I think there's definitely an element of that, and it shows how out of control that element is within the current administration.
That's absolutely shocking stuff when you think about the implications of that. But I want to move on now to the Stormy Daniels trial and what a travesty that has become. Some comments from Alan Dershowitz, who's written a great piece in the New York Post talking about his experience watching from the inside. And he said that the judge in Donald Trump's trial was an absolute tyrant who seemed to automatically be ruling against the defendant at every turn. The judge excluded obviously relevant evidence when offered by the defense, while including irrelevant evidence offered by the prosecution. This seems to me, Robert, further evidence that this trial, which again, this case never would have been brought if Donald Trump wasn't running for president again, is just, as we say here in Australia, a stitch-up.
Oh, completely. I mean, this is a case that has never been brought against anybody before. They can't cite a single case where they've tried to allege this kind of so-called fraud on the public through a campaign donation. There's no comparable case where they've ever alleged a internal bookkeeping entry of a company that's not even a publicly traded company somehow defrauded anybody. How something could that happened after the election, because these bookkeeping entries were made while he was president, could impact the election also makes no sense. All of it is ludicrous, and as what Professor Dershowitz saw, he saw a kangaroo court that would make kangaroo courts look good by comparison. You have a judge excluding the media, excluding members of the public, lecturing lawyer witnesses on the stand and threatening to exclude all evidence relating to them that damages the case. He's granting objections from the prosecution before the defense even finishes its question. He's giving jury instructions that are wrong on the law in order to mislead the jury to a particular verdict, all of while he has gagged President Trump and prohibited him from defending himself in the court of public opinion on a case that is entirely about influencing the court of public opinion. That is a show trial. You have lawyers like Good Logic, Joe Neerman, who has a media company trying to seek to remove the gag order, and all he is getting is the runaround by the New York courts. This case has put the New York court system on trial, and it is damning of the New York court system, not President Trump.
Absolutely, but there was a big backfire in the case here. Robert Costello, who is a former lawyer for Michael Cohen, who so much of the case hinges on, contradicted Cohen's sworn testimony regarding Trump's knowledge of the Stormy Daniels hush money payment and said in the court that Cohen told him numerous times that Trump knew nothing about the payments. Is this going to make a difference? I mean, it seems like it's just embarrassment and fail after another for this case.
No honest jury could convict Donald Trump based on the evidence that's been presented. He didn't commit a crime. There's no evidence that he even ordered the bookkeeping entry to be made or to be made the way that it was made. There's no evidence that, in fact, it didn't represent legal expenses since it was payment to an attorney for a legal invoice listed as legal expenses. There's no evidence other than Cohen's self-serving testimony that he ever even told Trump about any of this. And that's based on a phone call that supposedly happened in 90 seconds or less, where he's really complaining about a 14-year-old kid harassing him. So there's no credible evidence. I mean, Cohen admitted he stole from President Trump. He embezzled from President Trump. He lied to President Trump. He lied to courts. He lied to Congress. He lied to the public. And he's making millions of dollars based on this trial. That is not somebody that could be considered a credible witness beyond a reasonable doubt in any court, other than a court that is as partisan and prejudiced as this New York court has been against President Trump.
Well, Robert, just explain to us quickly before we go this whole thing here, because I thought this was hilarious that Michael Cohen gets up on the stand and he winds up just saying, oh, by the way, I stole $100,000 from the former president. How does this make, him a credible witness? I kind of thought that in a criminal trial, if somebody admits to that sort of thing, they're not a reliable witness, but I'm not the law-talking guy. You are.
Yeah, I mean, I told people I would do this cross-examination for free because of how much fun it would be to cross-examine Michael Cohen. The best phone call I turned down was Michael Cohen years ago, who reached out to my offices, and I just didn't trust him, and so I was like, I'm not going to return that call, thank God. But you have a guy who embezzled from the person he's accusing, was involved in an extortion scheme against the person he's now accusing, who's admitted he stole from the person he's now accusing, who's admitted that he's lied about him repeatedly and routinely for years, and that he would profit from a conviction in this case. You have no credit. You have every level of incredulousness that is attached to the only witness who puts any intent evidence in front of the entire jury. Even James Carville said that's nuts. So when you can't even get Carville to think that it's a worthy case, that gives you an idea of what a joke the case really is.
Robert Barnes, thanks for your time, and I think you're right. If we're going to call this a kangaroo court, we'd be guilty of cruelty to kangaroos. Robert Barnes, again, thank you so much. Now, after the break, the revenge of the normies. But first, the world was shocked with another grim reminder of Joe Biden's mental state this week. The president was giving a speech about the Middle East and the hostages, including American citizens still held by Hamas. Watch as Joe Biden claims that one of the hostages is there with him today in the audience until someone off stage corrects him.
My administration is working around the clock to free the remaining hostages, just as we have freed hostages already. And here today is Hirsch Goldberg Poland, and it's still, he is not here with us, but he's still being held by Hamas.
Again, really, really grim, and not the first time he's made this sort of grave error of speech. Honestly, how long can they keep propping this weekend at Bernie's president up? Stick around, we're going to take a quick break and come back with a former CIA analyst with a warning about how the deep state is going to try and put its thumb on the scales in the next election cycle, and how it all comes down to a battle between the elites and the normies after the break. Welcome back to the program. In a moment, I'll be joined by an ex-CIA analyst who will explain how the populism that elites lose their minds over is really just normal people reasserting themselves. But before we get to all that, well, gee, the president really had a shocker speaking at a campaign stop in Detroit the other day, so much that the White House had to do the biggest cleanup on Aisle Joe I've ever seen. Let's have a little look, shall we? Here, Joe Biden recalled the heady days when he was vice president during the pandemic.
And when I was vice president, things were kind of bad during the pandemic. And what happened was, Barack said to me, go to Detroit and help fix it. Well, poor mayor, he spent more time with me than he ever thought he was going to have to. God love you.
Sorry, wait, he wasn't vice president during the pandemic, except maybe in his mind. And who were the people who, quote, stormed Capitol Hill on January 6th, Mr. President?
He calls the erectionists who stormed Capitol Hill patriots.
I don't know, I think the word you're looking for there is insurrectionists. The whole thing was so bad that the official White House transcript came with 9 crossed-out corrections. Have a look at the bloopers in this helpful highlight reel.
And when I was vice president, things were kind of bad during the pandemic. I'm humbled to receive this organization. It truly inspires me. Saving millions of families $800,000 in premium, $8,000 a year in premium. We're cracking down on corporate landlords who keep rents down. The mortality rate for black moms who have nearly 3 times more likely to die. He calls the erectionists who stormed Capitol Hill patriots. Donald Trump has said if he loses again in November, there will be, quote, bloodshed. The NAACP spirit endures.
At this point, there's really only 2 options, I think. Either Joe Biden is really losing it, or maybe this is all just a cry for help from a president who doesn't want to do this anymore and is looking for an excuse to pull stumps. All right, let's get into it with my next guest. We've had him on before. He's a former CIA analyst and author of, among other things, a great book called The Revolt of the Public and the Crisis of Authority in the New Millennium. He's back now, and he's had a brilliant long-form essay at the Free Press, and as soon as I read it, I wanted to bring him on to talk about it because I think it explains so much of where we are right now. The piece is called The Revenge of the Normies, and in it, he basically explains what's going on between 2 groups of people in our society. He writes, the normies, normal people, want to get on with life. They want to work, get married, have children, boring stuff. That's what normal means. The elites, for their part, wish to change everything. Sex, the climate, our history, your automobile, your diet, even the straws with which you slurp your smoothie. And he joins us now to take us through it. Martin Gurry, welcome to the program. Now, Martin, you've described something which I think a lot of people feel but never quite articulate. But in this great struggle between the elites and the normies, who's winning right now?
Well, we're sort of in the third act of this conflict. The first one, of course, was when the internet put the normies on the political stage, and the elites were completely confused and confounded until around 2016, when they woke up and realized that the normies could actually elect somebody that they detested and loathed. The second act was the pandemic, where the public was very terrified, and the elites suddenly realized, wait, we can mandate all these changes, such as censorship and identitarian perfection for every transaction, because they're going to say yes. They're scared. They think we have science behind us. We're now in the third act, which is where the normies have decided, no, we're not worried anymore. And we are pushing back on all these mandates. And we do not believe that you have science behind you. We do not believe that you know hardly anything that you pretend to. And at the moment, I would say, I mean, it's a toss-up. It's a toss-up. But if I were to sort of say who's got the edge, it's the normies. And I say that only because just look at the elites in the eye. Look at Joe Biden in the eye, and you see fear. They are there. He is worried. His people are worried.
And, you know, you talk about in your piece, and you've spoken about it elsewhere, that really the biggest disruptor, as you said just now, is the internet. And you write in this piece that the elite dream is to turn back the clock on the internet. Now, here in Australia, we have a misinformation bill before the Parliament. We see lots of emphasis on misinformation laws all around the world. And people like Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson complaining that the First Amendment, which guarantees free speech in the U.S., hamstrings the government. Is this all part of that idea that they're needing to find legal ways to fight back against the ability of normal people to question?
Yeah, don't even get me started on this information. I'll run you out of your show. I mean, it is. It is to me. Let me put it clearly. I come from Cuba, right? So I am an immigrant. And it is, and I'm not a young person, as you can probably see. It is inconceivable to me that there are Supreme Court justices that feel that the First Amendment is some sort of, 18th century old-fashioned obstacle to the government working smoothly, and that the government, which has tried again and again and is trying it even as we speak, to silence opposition online by essentially intimidating the great digital platforms into going along with their ideas. So yeah, you find an elite class that less and less is interested in discussion, debate, reaching consensus, and more relies on the mandate. And that's not just in the United States, that's everywhere. As you say, Australia, you guys have had plenty of it.
Yeah, and, one of the things that I also find really interesting here is that the elites for a long time have kind of thought that they had ownership over minority groups and their votes and were able to control them. But earlier in the program, we saw the extraordinary scenes from the Bronx. Big black Hispanic populations there, and thousands of people were lining up to cheer Donald Trump, and these are minority members who would have been told never to vote Republican. How much is the normie coalition breaking out of traditional kind of groups to actually cut across racial and class lines?
Yeah, I think actually it's class more than anything else. If you look at many of the minorities in the United States, what we consider to be minorities, because of course, many groups that are affluent that get disqualified of being a minority. So you become a minority simply by being, below certain averages. And so they're people who are working class people. They have working class morality. They have basically very conservative tastes. They tend to be religious. Both blacks and Hispanics tend to be way more religious than whites. So historically, they have been housed for really good reasons. I'm sure they believe in the Democratic Party. But the world moves and the reasons change. And I think we are possibly seeing a historic shift. And if that happens, the Democratic Party just collapses because we are 50-50 and those minorities provide a little edge that the Democrats, whenever they win, it's because of that. That's the reason Joe Biden won in 2020.
So how are the elites striking back? Because it strikes me that they're kind of playing with fire here. One of the things that we see a lot on this program here is working class and black voters very upset about the border situation, for example, because they feel like this is a direct attack on them. But you've got all these people coming in to the country. That's real recipe for, social dysfunction, to say the least. And of course, also you have these legal cases and the weaponization of the Justice Department and all the courts against Donald Trump. All of these things strike me as very dangerous games for the elites to be playing to try and hold power. What do you think? Where does this go?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the elites are desperate. I think this is what I said before. You look them in the eye and what you see is fear. They know they're behind the eight ball, as we say here in the States. They basically are in deep trouble. And they're very entitled. They believe that they they should rule in perpetuity. They believe in something called our democracy. I love that phrase, very possessive. So they are playing with fire. I think they are playing with fire. Where do we go from here? I never make predictions, but let me tell you, I have been here before as an old person, as I said before. Biden reminds me very much of Jimmy Carter. What happened with Jimmy Carter was, it was a certain moment when the American people said, okay, not this guy. They had no judgment on who was running against them, or it was basically not this guy. This election is not going to be about Donald Trump. The Democrats want it to be about Donald Trump. It's going to be about Biden. And if my gut instinct is right, not a prediction, just an instinct, he doesn't have a chance.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think the Jimmy Carter analogy really, really holds, right down to the trouble we're having with Iran. It's amazing how history repeats itself. But finally, I just want to ask you one quick question, too. I'm really curious about how you write that the Israel and anti-Israel and anti-Semitic protests in the U.S. and elsewhere are kind of about seeing Jewish people as stand-ins for normies. What do you mean by that? How do these protests reflect this fight?
Well, you have to understand who the protesters are, right? A lot of them are, there's a class that are very pro-Palestinian. The vast majority know nothing about Israel or Palestine. They basically come from the fever swamps of the identitarian and anti-capitalist left. And basically, they see in the Jews, number one, they're the white occupiers and the white colonizers in Israel. But number two, to complete the stereotype, they are the swinish capitalists that run this evil system that they would like to destroy. So in the person of the Jews, of course, no matter where you stand, whether it's Nazi Germany or democratic America, you end up being the scapegoat, right? Well, right or left, the scapegoat. And that's basically what's happening here. The person of the Jew serves as basically the focus of resentment for a lot of these leftist progressives.
Martin Gurry, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. What's the difference between artificial intelligence and Joe Biden? Well, for one thing, AI actually has intelligence after a fashion. But could you tell the difference between the real Joe Biden and a deep-faked AI version? Check out what happened when CBS's Margaret Brennan was asked to see a clip of Joe Biden, whether a clip of Joe Biden speaking was real or fake. And here's a hint. Keep your eyes on the president's eyes.
That's what I'm going to ask you about.
You can't be pro-insurrection and pro-cop. You can't be pro-insurrection and pro-democracy. You can't be pro-insurrection and pro-American. Donald Trump lacked the courage to act.
So what did you think of this one?
He didn't blink.
Not at all, right?
So that suggests it's fake.
This one's actually real.
How's that?
And yes, he didn't blink for the whole 17-second clip. And when this actually surfaced about a year ago, there were conspiracy theories and people thinking that this had to have been a deep fake.
Wow, that was creepy. I would have thought that was fake too. I mean, why isn't he blinking? Come on, man. Welcome back to the program. Now, I want to go back to that amazing Trump rally that happened in the Bronx, New York, Thursday afternoon, New York time. It wasn't remarkable just for the content. Trump hit a lot of his standard lines, but for the fact that he took this right into the heart of Democrat country. Listen to the reaction when he promises to put America first.
Very simply, Joe Biden puts illegal aliens first. I put America first. I put America first.
And he also talked a lot about crime in big cities like New York.
You all know it's a disaster. You know the names of these lunatic policies. No cash bail. Somebody kills somebody. Go out. No bail. Don't worry. Go out and kill a couple of more people. Defund our great police. Defund the police. Sanctuary cities. Release violent repeat offenders from jail. Joe Biden supports all of this insanity and much more, but millions of people across New York know it's crazy.
And he ended on a promise.
There is nothing we cannot do and no height we cannot achieve. Together we will make America powerful again. We will make America wealthy again. We will make America strong again. We will make America proud again. We will make America safe again. We will make America great again. Thank you, Bronx. Thank you, New York. We love you. Thank you. God bless everybody. God bless you. God bless you.
And despite the claims of some, this was very much a very local event full of local people from the Bronx. Here's a few voices from the crowd.
Where are you from?
The Bronx, actually.
I'm originally from the Bronx and from New York.
I'm from the Bronx.
Right here in the Bronx, New York. This is home, right here. AOC says if you're not a Democrat, you don't belong here in the Bronx. Right. What do you say?
I disagree with that.
I don't think she should be here in the Bronx. I actually don't know any Democrats living in the Bronx.
Well, they all seem to be having fun, but the only person who didn't seem to be having a good time at the rally was this CNN correspondent.
What was the crowd like, and what kind of response did he get?
Well, certainly a bigger crowd than I think Democrats would like to see, particularly given this is one of the bluest counties in the entire country. Now, one of the things that was interesting to me is that the Trump campaign said that they were going to micro-target to get people from the community to come to this rally. I wasn't sure what to expect. I've gone to a lot of these rallies across the country, and there are often people who travel hundreds of miles to see Donald Trump, and they're not necessarily part of the community. However, one of the things that I found was that there were a lot of people here that were actually from the Bronx.
Look, it's a basic rule of politics. The side that is having a good time is going to attract more people to it, and they are also more likely to win. Now, remember, New York State hasn't gone for the Republican presidential candidate since 1984, when Ronald Reagan swept into a second term on a landslide. And in the part of the Bronx where Trump spoke earlier, well, in 2020, local voting booths went between 80 and 90% in Biden's favor. This is not Trump's normal country, but then again, these are not normal times. Taken from another New Yorker, New York is definitely in play. Hey, we got to take a quick break before Only in America, and it's a funny one this week you're not going to want to miss. But also, speaking of funny, how about some more comedy stylings of Donald J. Trump? Here's a little something he put out the other night on Truth Social, where he was having some fun with Joe Biden's pause.
Imagine what we can do next. 4 more years. Pause.
Now think if I read my teleprompter and I'm going, well, let's see, because of the weakness in the economy, I'd like to apologize. Pause. What was that? That's unbelievable. Pause. You know, I was watching it. I said, that was weird.
Don't forget to tip your waiter. Only in America is next. Welcome back to the program, and now it's time for a little segment we like to call Only in America. Hey, remember the days when no matter how ridiculous the Biden-Harris administration was, they refrained from mining any of this comedy gold on TV? Well, those days are long gone. Check out this segment from the reliably hard-left Daily Show, which just did a deep dive into how Kamala Harris's speeches are written. Have a look.
Talking about the significance of the passage of time, right? The significance of the passage of time. So when you think about it, there is great significance to the passage of time.
Seems like maybe it's a small issue, it's a big issue. You need to get to go, and need to be able to get where you need to go to do the work and get home.
It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day.
My name is Dahlia Rose Hibiscus, and I am Vice President Kamala Harris's Holistic Thought Advisor. What is a Holistic Thought Advisor? It's holistic, yes, and I am advising. And what do we mean when we say that? It means that I am the one by whom the thoughts are being advised. I lead the vice president on not so much sentences as idea voyages.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
It's a process I call speaking without thinking. It's not about the destination of the thought. It's about the journey and how many words you use to describe the journey.
That's on top of everything else that we know and don't know yet, based on what we've just been able to see. And because we've seen it or not doesn't mean it hasn't happened.
I hear the counter arguments all the time. People should be able to understand what their leaders are saying when they talk. But I prefer to leave Kamala's thoughts open to interpretation, like a work of modern art that you look at and go, I wonder what that was all about.
See the moment in time in which we exist and are present. And to be able to contextualize it, to understand where we exist in the history and in the moment as it relates not only to the past but the future.
It really is such a career highlight to be working with someone with such an advanced mind space as the vice president. I also sell essential oils on Facebook Marketplace.
Wow, that's deep, man. That's also all the time we've got together this week, so see you next time. And in the meantime, have a great weekend, unburdened by what has been. Bye-bye.